In Season 2 of the Nested Healing Podcast, From Surviving to Thriving, we will take you with us on our journey to the many nourishing lands of healing. With a new guest for each episode, we will get to embark on each of their healing journeys, with their curiosity being, what challenges did they face, and just how did they manage to come up on the other side? From self-love and acceptance, all the way to dance and movement, we will explore the myriad of healing components shining in each of our guests' stories. How can we relate and apply this to our own lives? How can we brighten our light through a dark tunnel? Stay with us on our beautiful deep dive into healing.
Welcome to the Nested Healing Podcast. I'm here with Rachel today. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. Looking forward to hearing your story today.
I'm excited for the opportunity. It's always neat to talk about the journey.
It is a journey, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, and ongoing. And I think a lot of people, that's one of the misconceptions, especially whether you start an ILP program or a 12-step or therapy, that at some point there's going to be, okay, I'm done. Because that's just not how that works, and it's, what do they say, marathon, not a sprint, and then being graceful with yourself to just keep peeling those layers.
Such wonderful advice as a starting point there. And I'm curious, out of all of those layers you're mentioning and sort of as a starting point of your journey, what feels like the best place for you to start?
So when I think of healing and recovery, um, my story for sure encompasses my whole family. My father is coming up on 30 years sober this month, and I my mother married when I was about 6 years old, and unbeknownst to me, that of course there was anything, lurking under the surface there. He seemed wonderful and is wonderful, but real quickly we realized his over the road construction job and just behaviors from single life didn't translate well to now, married with a young daughter and a baby on the way. And my life dynamic and household landscape changed really drastically. Um, and so there was domestic violence, of course, growing up in an alcoholic home. This went on for several years. He didn't get sober till 1995, and that took, legal intervention. That was the first time that I ever was aware of like 12-step recovery or my mom going to Al-Anon and trying to learn how to take care of herself. And because I just thought, well, if we left, that would solve the problem, and they ended up working things out. Um, wasn't happy about that at the time. And then we went on, started this family journey of recovery. At that point, I was going through high school. I could not wait to get out of that house. Could not wait. I graduated at 17, moved into the dorms. And because I think he was trying to control anything he could because he was learning about powerlessness and not having control and losing his license and all of those things. And so he's got this teenage daughter, and I think they were very scared, of all the what could and all of that. And so was really strict at my house. And so when I got a taste of freedom, I figured out, kind of go big or go home, and then found myself in a similar predicament with drugs and alcohol. And of course, now knowing, when you think about like those habitual survival strategies, and you think about like fight or flight, and I had the physical escape and then found the other escape, never knowing to deal with any of that stuff. And of course, I mean, most 18, 19-year-olds don't. And but then, so then starts kind of that self-inflicted trauma. And then, that went on for a good decade before I had any real consequences and really had any motivation to sit down and do something different. And through a slew of domestic violence relationships, I had my oldest child when I was 23. He's now 19, and kind of drug him through figuring it out as a young mom and on the wagon, off the wagon, type of deal. And um, finally, when he was 5, I got the opportunity to go to treatment for the first time. And the arresting officer in my story acted on response and somehow saw something and showed up in court the next morning and asked the judge if he would consider letting me pursue treatment. And I didn't think I needed it. I just thought, if I changed some behaviors or maybe changed who I hung around, that would be enough. Um, and let me say, prior to that, I had already experienced some jail time and had already had some criminal charges and whatnot, but it wasn't enough for me to take it seriously. And then about a week later, I found out I was going to have my daughter, who is now 13. And I thought, oh gosh, okay, I've got to do something serious now. And not that Eli wasn't enough, but it just felt really real then. It felt like I'm obviously going to have some more criminal charges attached to this already established record. Probably going to have to go back to jail. I need to really get serious about this, and then of course having the realization that, and now we're going to be. It's not just going to be me and my son. We're going to be a family of 3. Um, so that kind of starts a different thing that I just really kind of realized over the past going on 2 years now. So my youngest is a year old, and she turned a year old on January 24th. I get married in 2021. My husband is quite a bit older than me. I was over 40. I thought baby bearing days were over for me. I just gotten accepted to grad school and just was not thinking that I was going to have, any more growth in my family. And we found out that we were expecting the weekend that my oldest was graduating from high school. Now, I got pregnant with my 13-year-old after having those charges. I got I have a 6-year-old as well, so there's continuation here. But what I realized with my last pregnancy was because my year that I spent 9 months, but the year leading up to and a few months after of having my daughter, my 13-year-old daughter, I did weekends in jail. And so with that, you go in every weekend and you strip search. You're strip searched and um, I was afforded the opportunity to serve that year in weekends so that I could have traditional prenatal care. I would drive myself to the jail on Friday nights. My car sat outside. I would come out on Monday mornings. Extremely lucky to be able to do that. I even learned how to write my own motions so that they had a standing order that in the event I went into labor, that I wasn't taken to the medical center handcuffed and shackled, that I got to just take myself the 3 blocks around the corner. And and so I had some type of realization that, like, okay, these aren't normal circumstances. This is traumatic events. But I did not, like, it didn't hit me until I was having a nail this time. And when I realized that, like, I didn't know that it was possible for me to have those normal circumstances, to have the gender reveal and feel the freedom to post my pregnancy journey on social media, because I wasn't trying to, like, save my family the embarrassment of yet another unwed pregnancy and, all of those things. And it was like a ton of bricks. And then to think that, like, prenatal walked into this facility every week. And at one point, I remember remembering that I would do the hokey pokey. Like I would sing, because there was this really hard edged, like really aggressive guard. And, she would bend over, da 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 da, and so I would say, like, I thought I've got to do something. Well, now I realize, right, that like it was deflecting. Like I need another way to escape, right? In that moment, like, so let's just sing the hokey pokey. And she'd get so frustrated with me. And I thought like that was just you had to do it. I had to do it, but I didn't think about, until 12 years later how traumatic that was. And so the journey of recovering, I've always been involved in some capacity in a 12-step group since getting clean and sober myself after that opportunity to go to treatment. Um, After about 6 years, the first time I made the choice to use again. And that took about 8 months to get my bearings back in order and figure out, and at which time I found out that I was having my 6-year-old. And sometimes when I tell my story, I say, well, when I do what I do, I either end up with felonies or babies. And in that instance, I feel very fortunate that it was the latter. Um, he definitely jarred me enough at that moment. It was in March 7 years ago. We just passed that milestone that I found out I was pregnant. And I had not really up until that point, not until that season, I'd worked with an agency that I work for now called the Bridge to Recovery, and they exposed me to like ACA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics. They did a lot of inner child work, and so I'd had a little bit of taste of like that, those modalities and IFS and thinking about like it, but it wasn't until this last 7 years that I have really like gone on my own journey and utilizing and getting to know that little girl that, went through all of those things with that alcoholic dad, and that teenage girl that was forced to have an abortion, and that just all of those parts that then, still needed to be loved on and hugged and healed through, so that we could get to where now I say, like, this year was beating my own personal best and coming to a new milestone. So,
Thanks so much for sharing all that, Rachel. It's inspiring, and also I can definitely see like the statement you made in the beginning, how your own journey is really intertwined with family, right? In so many ways, from your family of origin to the family you've created to the internal family system and
mhm,
inner healing.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. I'm also curious how you might expand a little bit on one thing I noticed is how the sort of cyclotrauma kind of repeats, right? Whether that's like intergenerationally or even in our own patterns, maybe doing the same thing a couple times before we get it. But then how those sort of moments of clarity come, or those sort of interventions or opportunities come that give us a chance to break that cycle.
Mm,
You mentioned several in that story there, but I wonder if you'd expand on any of those
yeah.
moments. Yeah.
It's really funny that you mentioned that because one of the longest times I was ever incarcerated was a 6-month period. And at one point in time, my grandfather wrote me, and Ann Landers, I don't guess there's an Ann Landers anymore. He cut out a snippet, and it talked about this kind of story of when you keep walking under this ladder and you bump your head on the same rung, until you figure out, like, oh, go around, bend down, like, and graduate to the next lesson. Like we're going to keep repeating that lesson until we graduate to the next thing. And so many times, especially working with ladies, you hear though that like I keep doing this, I keep my mom used to say when talking about relationship choices and well if you keep shopping at the same store you're going to keep getting the same thing, and I think for me that's where that kind of I see that play out where yeah, one of the things that I said to my dad when my parents decided to get back together was, I'll never be like you. And I remember him saying, never say never. And I thought, well, you don't know, no, like I've had enough of this. And then, so then watching it, play out and being the same kind of parent at one point in time that he was to my child. Struggling with the same things, go finding myself sitting in, a similar relationship all over again, relapsing or recidivism and, all of those things. It's like, yeah, until I really connected the dots between like, why? Why am I doing this? Like, where do the relationship choices fall in with my self-worth as much so as the substance use and the behaviors and everything else where do the unaddressed trauma um, I've never met my biological father, and while I've worked through that journey as well and made peace with that, but it was kind of a taboo discussion. We didn't talk about it. I didn't even know his name till I was 29, and finally I told my mom like I'm left with either the fantasy of what could be or the like tragedy of what must have happened, why we can't talk about this. And so, and when you think of that, like just being wanted, and so then you put yourself in relationships and codependent relationships, and I need you to make me okay, and like because at the end of the day, I'm participating in all of those things because I don't know how to be okay with me. Um, and now addressing it from a different aspect, so you get to a different level, right? And then comes workaholism and perfectionism and all of the things, imposter syndrome, and and so it's like, oh, but I used to have a mentor, well, she still is a mentor of mine, but she used to say, one day you'll be able to see yourself coming. And it blew past me, right? Like I didn't know. Now I totally get that when you see yourself coming. So,
You want
yeah.
to expand on that? What does that mean when you see yourself coming?
So for me, and the way that I see it now is like when I start to, you talk about like real, I guess, first level, right? Of like you're new into recovery, you're new in your healing journey. You might hear somebody say like to pay attention to HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Um, I know that I'm irritable and I'm discontent, like nothing is okay. I'm not, I don't have, my spiritual footing. I'm reacting historically to all these things that are, hitting my wounded triggers, right? And so if I just think like, well, what needs aren't getting met, am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired? Where's this really coming from? Now, here we are 14 years later, and it's like, oh, sis, you're premenopausal, you're, a year out from giving birth as an older mom. It's where is that coming from? Because I can respond, but most of the time, whatever we're responding to present day, there's always some type of interlap into either historical event or underlying something, when you think of people with road rage or whatever, like it's not, they didn't blow up because somebody cut them off, like they didn't, it's not because of that isolated incident. It's where am I coming? And so now I can kind of see her coming when I start to feel that off season and realizing, whether and so now it's all these pieces, right? Like I get to, maybe for some people it's talking to their psych provider, for some people it's talking to their therapist, for some people later it's talking to their coach, for, like who do I loop in that knows me? Knows my behaviors, knows my norms, and where my baseline is, and I can say, Jennifer, I acted a fool today, and you can say, well, last week you and Antoine were having that argument. Did you take that to work? And but we don't know that, with 30, 60, 90 days clean. You don't know that when you're 2 weeks out of a 3-year sentence that you just got released from incarceration or out of a domestic violence relationship or whatever, in those early stages of recovery.
That makes so much sense. I'm so glad you took the time to explain that. Yeah,
Thanks
I
for
totally get what
asking.
you're saying now. Um, and yeah, I kind of feel like part of how I understand that is like when we're new in recovery at anything, right? Whether it's from, addiction or incarceration or domestic violence or childhood trauma, right? Anytime in those new stages, we're really dealing with the most immediate level concerns, right?
Mhm.
But then a little further in the process, we start to get to some of those root causes, some of those underlying things that are part of the origination of the pattern. And that's where you're really getting into the trauma healing work.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's where, the ACA and the IFS and all of that is really coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
For sure.
Do you want to share a little bit more about how that was for you, working through, the IFS through ACA and that inner reparenting, working with your inner child?
For sure. So, where I currently work, is a place called the Bridge to Recovery. I got the opportunity 10 years ago to come in an entry level position and work in client relations. And so there was a full-time house manager, and I would sub for her because she had her husband was a trucker. And so the weekends that she would go to see him, I would sub, and then some nights I would get to take them to 12-step meetings. And we're located just about an hour and 20 minutes north of Nashville. And on Tuesday evenings, I would get to take them to a ACA meeting in right off of Vanderbilt's campus. And the first time that I walked in and I heard them read the laundry list, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, where have these people been? The last 5 years of my life, like, oh my goodness, like, I don't think that I had ever sat in a room, and I am at home in my 12-step affiliation. Like, I mean, I love my extended family. I love my clean family. Like, but it was it was just different. And it was so then we get back to the facility, I get the red book, like I'm reading through it. I'm like, and then fast forward a few years later, I get my first case management job. So I've completed my bachelor's. I'm working under a therapist as a case manager. I come in one day and I'm like unloading, and he goes, do you have a therapist? And I was like, well, I work for a therapist. What do I need one for? He was like, you need a therapist. And so he, made a recommendation. And then after several sessions, and we were kind of rehashing everything, and I was telling her about my family of origin, and she presented the IFS and talking about, well, what part of that responded for you today? What part, like, and I was like, well, what do you mean? And so she, we went in about, the firefighter or the manager or, the protective parts and I was like, oh, okay, okay. So, then I've gotten the opportunity now to go back to the bridge, and I wear a couple of roles in community relations and a therapist role. And now I get to watch people. Like, one of the things we do is the inner child rescue, and to watch that unfold is amazing. But I got to have the same experience myself. And so when I heard for the first time, so one particular episode one day, I lived upstairs on the second floor of our house growing up, and my dad was at the bottom, and he was just tore to pieces and hurling, like just degrading. And the thing is, like leading up to, I went in for like a 2 week immersion and to really do some intensive work. And leading up to that, he and I had had an encounter in my driveway, and this was like in this last year. And so he made the statement that, well, we remember that a little differently. And before I could think about it, I said, well, because you were drunk. And like we hadn't had a conversation about any of that in a really long time. And like immediately I welled up. I'm immediately standing there. I'm that 15-year-old girl again, standing in the driveway, like, and I was like, I didn't mean that. And he said, I understand, and you're probably right. And I was like, oh, okay. Now, and then I feel very fortunate because a lot of people don't get to have that validation. And so but I'm still kind of ruminating on some of this stuff, and then I go in to this immersion that's kind of fresh experience, and I get this opportunity to do some empty chair work. And I expressed, in this empty chair work, and I mean, I don't, after that exercise, leading up to that, sometimes that inner critic, that's what I would hear so much of the time. And it was something along the lines of like how stupid I was or something. But I mean, I knew it word for word and I could hear it. I was back up at the top of those stairs. I could hear it. And after that, I cannot hear that anymore. It's like I got a magic eraser. And for me, having that experience of, the reparenting and telling her, like, we don't live at 1607 anymore. It's not scary anymore. You can say that. That's okay to say that to your dad. Like, that's the truth, right? It happened. We remember it differently. We have a different perspective, but you were also drunk. So I don't know how accurate your recollection is. And then the 180 of that is then, especially with my oldest child, like I want him to have the opportunity to do the same. Um, and so it's like, but working on me first so that I'm okay to handle all of that. And because not taking it from a place of, because if I don't heal her, if when we come out of those, wounded children responding, then everything that anybody does to me is going to be her responding, not, what I know to be true, what I know to be, this is just a difference of opinion in the workplace. This is not, you're not telling me I'm wrong. Like, um, and then being able to express that sometimes, because that's real, like, and as a clinician, we want to have it all together. There was an email exchange with my CEO and me, and I circled back, and on a phone call, I was able to say, I wasn't hearing a difference of opinion. I was hearing you say you're doing this wrong, and I don't want to be wrong. I want to do a good job, right? I still want to be the A+ student, like, um, but anyway, so yeah, just really watching all those things still come to light. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So important, the possibility of repair of some of those wounds, whether it's through being able to actually resolve that and repair that with our parents, or whether it's able to do it with our inner child, with our inner loving parent, and that both of those pathways are available so that there's ways to repair with your actual parents and also even without them when they aren't willing to come to the conversation. That feels so
yeah,
important.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Ah, pivotal.
Mm.
I was working with a lady not too long ago, and every interaction she was talking about with everybody, she didn't show up to something that she felt like she should have. When she showed up again, well, they were judging me. Well, so and so said that I missed you at this. Was she thinking that I should have come? And I was like, let's talk about why you hear that way, like where you didn't measure up in somebody's skew or by somebody's barometer, and leave that mess with them. Like, you don't have to keep carrying that scale anymore. No, she just wanted to make sure you were okay. She said, I miss you. Is it possible that she genuinely just missed you? Well, I didn't think about that. And I thought, how often do we automatically knee-jerk response is to hear it with that negative ear. Like, and it creates so much, it creates a lot of unnecessary conflict sometimes and inner anxiety and all of that.
Absolutely. And you gave such a beautiful example of how doing that inner work, that inner child work can help alleviate that pattern. You're saying there's that negative voice that isn't there anymore after a piece of
That
work you've done, right?
that phrase is gone. It is just yeah. And I'm like, oh wow, that's just amazing that it can, when you think about like where we've wired these pathways, and like figuring out how to rework that, um, and of course, whether it's sometimes telling somebody in the beginning to, snap the rubber band or do the, whatever when they hear that. Um, and then how we get used to it. And then that becomes a process and sometimes addiction in and of itself of the negative inner loop, because it's comforting and it's what we know, it's familiar.
Well, I also am noticing there's so many different sort of paths to healing that you've even mentioned so far, right? Like having the opportunity to go to treatment, being in 12 steps, being able to do some trauma healing work, therapy. Um, as you're layering on all of those sort of different parts of your healing journey, I'm curious, how was your experience in navigating that? As your healing journey continued to deepen over the years,
Yeah.
yeah, what was your experience of each of those kind of shifts as you look at them in the context of a whole journey?
So in the first 6 years of like recovery for me after leaving treatment, I was just 12 step. And it was fundamentally, I think, I mean, that's the only story I know. Like that was what, and so I told you that we got kind of affiliated or acclimated with 12 step with my dad, at that point, what, 15 years before that. And so he left, and his sponsor died. He had found church, really got locked in, but with a group of guys. And that, fast forward, I see where like he incorporated the same types of things, and he had like-minded individuals, and he had mentors, and he had people he was helping, and he had, a camp that he would go to and paint and like, but in my mind, because I heard these cliches about like you keep going, for the newcomer and this and that, and I just felt like, well, why you should still be there to tell people how to do that. So I was a little resentful, and I would every once in a while say, well, come on, let's go, because he went to one fellowship, I went to the other, and I'd be like, well, I'll go with you. He would every once in a while, I think, just to entertain me. We'd go pick up a token or whatever, and um but I didn't have that experience yet. Like I didn't have that layer with me. And so then when I started using again, um, not realizing at that point, like, so I was working, I was finishing up my bachelor's. I'd gone back into event planning. I'd left working in treatment. I'd let my recovery home go, but I'm running 23 hours a day, right? Like I'm planning weddings and high school reunions and you name it, whatever. And that's, sometimes you're at work till, 3 o'clock in the morning. And, And then up at school at 8 o'clock, and like that perfectionism stuff was like full throttle, right? Like, let me just do it all. And I've got, these two kids and a single mom. And um, so, of course, there was the solution of substances that could give me unlimited hours and, I think kind of give me this limitless world that I knew of. And so let me use that again. And so, um, when I found out I was pregnant with Micah, I was still really resentful at like our recovery community because of course people were talking about me and this and that, and well, yeah, you gave them a little something to talk about, Rachel. Like why wouldn't they? And so and I thought that I had also blown my credibility. We don't have a super huge community here. And so I thought, well, there's no way that like I can get back into, there's no way that I can, finish my social work degree. There's no way that what treatment facility is going to hire me? Like what. And so I was really, really ashamed, but I didn't recognize it as that, right? It came up as anger and me pointing the finger at them, and they're the reason why I'm not going to come around. And so finally, on April 20th of 2018, I was sick and nauseous, and I thought, okay, I give. I can't do this on my own anymore. And so I went to a meeting. It was a Friday night. And then, like I still had friends that were affiliated other places, and somebody had mentioned um, some trauma work and this and that. I had some alumni from my own program that had gone on and done some different things, and some girls that were like, "Well, I do this now, and I've got this workbook or that," or um, and so I kind of started just getting curious enough to like scratch the surface into, well, maybe I need more than that. Maybe that isn't, maybe that served its purpose, and I still need that in part of this, and I still, I want to reconnect with those friends, but I need something else. And so within a few months, I wanted to um, develop a recovery rally here, and I had this like I don't know what to call it, vision or idea or whatever, that I wanted us to have. We have this park called Circus Square, and it's centrally located. It's like this starburst thing. There's a fountain in the middle. Like I could just imagine this, and we hadn't had anything like that. But I was seeing events like this in other areas, and I thought like somebody needs. I wanted like music and bounce houses and vendors and all the things. But again, here I am, like operating from this wounded shame of like, who am I to say like I want to do this, and they're going to be like, well, who are you? You were just using last year. And so, but I got the courage to go to our local reentry council and present that this was in May, that in September I want to have this festival. Okay. And for whatever reason, Jennifer, they were like, we love it. We love this idea. Yes, let's do it. Let's do and that became their biggest fundraiser. It was the first event of this kind in our community. We had what we called a freedom walk from our river walk up what's called College Street to Circus Square to kick off the event. I figured that there would be like 30 people, right? We bussed people down there so they could park at the central location and then start at the walk. And I was the last van to go down because I was making sure everybody knew, like, we're loading up, we're going down. And when I got down there, there's this like medallion thing in the middle of this at the head of this bridge. And that circle was covered with people. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm blown away, right? Like I'm crying, like, and so I realized, like, through those events, and I had reapplied to social work school, and all this, I'm like going in and hanging my head and telling this story about like I was 6 years clean, I used again, and like I'm so embarrassed, and so I realized that it, it wasn't. that happens, right? Like people use again, people relapse, people fall off the wagon, people. And that number one, it gave me a totally different perspective because how many people now sit in rooms with me in group or in individual therapy or coming into my house or whatever, and that's their story. And like I can identify with where if I had had this squeaky clean, like, oh well, not me, it only took one and done, and I couldn't identify with them, I could not. And so then, like I said, through that, then I end up kind of getting back into I travel a couple times and go to the ACA meeting that I had talked about because I thought, well, that's an hour down the road. And then end up I finished my degree, I found that therapist, and then here I am, and so then it starts that layer of do this, practice what you preach, and I mean I've always tried and been really big about that, whether it's budgeting or self-care or but I don't know why I hadn't at that point ever sought out an individual therapist. 'Cause Lord knows I needed it. But and so then when she incorporated the IFS and I was like, okay, yeah, here we are. Like here is the why. And then two, because of that experience, like I didn't trust myself anymore, because I knew how great recovery was and I knew like and I'd let myself down. But then circling back to where did those behaviors come in? Like I said, with the people pleasing and the perfectionism and the how do I go to that when I'm not using a substance? How do I go to a dysfunctional relationship if I'm not like we're just Rachel, you're still just looking for a feel good. And so in acquiring sustainability, what about when it doesn't feel good? What about when you don't get the grant? What about when you don't get accepted to the program? What about when you're not hired for the job? What about when the relationship fails? What about when you lose your grandmother? Like, how do you go through that without retreating and still trying to escape?
The question I have for you now is kind of if we were to divide your life into maybe like three sections or four sections, right?
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
something like childhood,
Okay.
uh, pre-recovery, the first recovery that was 12 step only,
Mm-hmm.
second recovery that's 12 step plus therapy plus trauma work, right? Like if
Yeah.
you were to kind of put your life in a couple different sections, how do you notice your self-image change in each of those time periods or your perception of the world?
So childhood would probably, if I would probably almost divide it. Because before my mom got married, we lived in the house that I live in now. I got the opportunity to buy my childhood home after my grandmother passed. Tuesday, it'll be 2 years since she passed away. And I this was 100% home. We talk about like when, if you got attention, affection, nurturing, all of that kind of stuff, then this is the home where that originated from for me. And then sometimes I ask people, to kind of outline or pinpoint if they can when they lost their authentic self. And for me, when my dad said, what goes on in this house stays in this house, and children are to be seen, not to be heard, and all of the things that just such a sudden shift in. And I learned quickly, like, the mask goes on because as soon as we walked out of that house, when we came here for a 4th of July get together or walked into church or walked into school, like, how are you? Fine, and like, yeah, everything's good. Yeah, and I would watch my mom do that. And like, we never had to do that here. It was if you were having a bad day, you could say that. If you were having things, people didn't yell and scream at each other. You weren't berated and there wasn't, physical violence. And so that would be kind of the pre and post in childhood, I think. Um, and then very much from 18 to 28, um, self-image and self-worth were absolutely none. Um, but I didn't know that because I had this again, like I'd learned to adapt. I'd learned to put these masks on and wear these chameleon camouflages. And so I sold drugs for a long time. And like that was a great feel good, right? Outside of the use of anything, because everywhere you go, like people needed you and wanted you and like it was awesome. It was, really like ego boosting. And but at the end of the day, like it didn't align with what I know to be good and right. And, when you're harming people or watching people self-destruct and, but you just keep, you go deeper and deeper. And so, then the first phase of recovery, definitely, I kind of now looking back, think that it was still very much a mask to an extent of like, if I just act as if I do this, and things became good and doors started opening and things were, um, but I don't think that I really knew to be able to say like I'm struggling with, today, or I had this thought about myself, or I got this opportunity, but I really don't feel like I'm qualified, and what do I do with that? And um, I'm worried that because, something happened with my kid at school and the teachers are gonna still think, oh well she's still, a POS mom, like, it's like um so I just tried to like wrap everything up, dot my I's, cross my T's, wrap it up, put a bow on it, and going. And then like my identity was when I started at the domestic violence shelter, when I started my recovery home, when I like it was always tied to something like I didn't know just how to be me. And so this last 7 years has been like the journey, I think, really being okay, and probably more so in the last 2 years than anything in um, finding real self-worth in fallibility. So I told you when found out I was having a nail, my youngest, it was my oldest high school graduation. And I'd also just applied to a graduate program, advanced standing grad program, so I could start, complete my CSW, start working on my LCSW, like I've got these big goals, like and so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how is all of this going to work? Like I'm calculating, when I would have gotten pregnant, I would be due. Okay, this will be the beginning of the spring semester. How is this going to work? Like I had applied for this scholarship, like all of this stuff. And so the night before I was scheduled to be induced was our first class for the spring semester. I'd made it through the fall semester. I come in, I told them, I'm pregnant. I've networked in our community. I had my practicum site, like I'm taking a full load, practicum, still working full time, all the things. And but I had, I knew that that was covered, like that wasn't going to be a problem. And so pending that everything, healthy birth, healthy baby, then, we just keep it trucking. And so I go into class and they're like, well, when are you due? And I was like, tomorrow, I'm having a baby in the morning. And so This is Tuesday night. I go to the hospital on Wednesday. I come home on Friday, and the following Tuesday night, I go to class. My husband, who his oldest is 33, is a child in Virginia. We have a grandbaby there. And his most experience was with my 6-year-old. He came into our lives when he was right about one. But like brand new baby experience for him was a long time ago. So thank goodness for my 13-year-old to be here and kind of help him out and remind him all the things to do just for the 2 hours. But I'm going. The syllabus says I can only miss one class. Like heaven forbid that something happened down the semester and I have to miss. Like I'm well, I'm going. And one of the our field site instructor comes in and she goes, "What is wrong with you?" And I was like, "What do you mean? You just had a baby, Rachel. Like there's a Zoom option. There's this like." But there it is, right? Like to such the degree that I am such a perfectionist and oftentimes people pleaser and think that I have to measure up because it's that spectrum, right? I'm either like grandiose and great or I'm nothing. Like, and so I when she said, "What is wrong with you?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, like so this was a year ago, just this January that that scenario took place." And I've really worked on like how to allow myself to say, I have a lot on my plate. If I'm secretary on a board or whatever, I'm sorry the minutes weren't sent sooner. I was finishing up this or, whatever. This girl needed a car seat and I didn't get it from the lady that was donating it, quite as timely as I wanted to. Just the things of like, because I had a girlfriend remind me also really kindly that I was complaining about somebody not filling their roles and responsibilities prior to that scenario. And she said, "Well, is it that she didn't do what she was supposed to do, or are you a little bit jealous that she can give herself permission to say, 'I'm sorry, I didn't get that done,' and you don't know how to do that?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah." And so watching and really getting into like, especially facilitating more inner child stuff. And so, doing the research and, the body keeps score and all of the things that like, man, how those things show up continually, and that, yeah, so this season especially is, I would just say humility, like I can just um, be a human being, not a human doing, that how much I can do for people does not encompass my self-worth either. Because there was a lot of, especially early on, like in the human services field and as an advocate, and I really took on how much could I do? And then I needed to say yes to everybody, and I always needed to answer the phone, and I always needed to, and so this last 7 years really like giving myself grace, boundaries, and like I'm off today. I'm not, and so that what does that mean? That means my family, like they get me this on this day and unless it is absolutely a dire emergency, then that's who gets me today, if I'm off. So
That strikes me as being a lot more maybe balanced. I know you mentioned humility and human and also yeah, you're balancing time off, right?
yeah, trying to and I will say, I do want to mention that, like, I don't think that it is by accident. There is something that divine that kind of interweaves all of us, and somehow with the a massive amount of people that are on this planet. In that last year, I made acquaintance with Christy. And so I'd signed up for this nonprofit leadership class. I don't know who this lady is from Adam. And when I tell you like the amount of like, oh my gosh, this is going on. Can I bend your ear? Can I ask you about this? Can I do like,
Mhm.
who, I mean, because yeah, I am really, really, really grateful. Where are you operating from? Your head, heart, gut, like all
Mhm.
of that stuff that's kind of come in the last year, has absolutely been pivotal in navigating because it's been positive stresses, right? Like I met my husband, we got married, we have a baby, like you go to grad school, we buy a house, like, but even those positive changes are extremely stressful. And a lot of times, especially for people in recovery, can be triggers. Um, and so I like how to land when you kind of arrive in these different places and these different things. And then also, with having the recovery home for a long time, I was one of the majority of the ladies' beds in this area. That shifted tremendously in the last year, which is awesome, right? Like they have so many choices now and there's so many providers and yeah, so I don't feel that urgency because like, oh, you're the only place, Rachel, you got to answer the phone. But then also too, like figuring out because who are you when you're not that girl? Like, and like that related a lot with that old Rachel of like that girl in the party scene, that girl in the recovery scene. Like, I like that. Be honest with yourself. Like, um, and so, but what happens when I don't have this to say, Rachel, with blah 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 blah? Like, being secure in who are you when you take away all the things and all the hats and who are you?
That feels almost really full circle. Like, who are you? Would you take away all of the things and the hats? And if I could even add the word the masks, like you mentioned, our
Uh-huh.
childhood, and that's back to authentic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
All the way back around to the authentic state you experienced before trauma.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't think it's any mistake when we got the loan approval for the house and I called one of my best friends and I was like, I finally get to go home.
Mm,
Um, and so just being able to really kind of get back to those roots, of like,
mm,
yeah, who did she want to be? And that's like, so I do the whole, writing with your non-dominant hand and points and times, like when I really need to like why do you want to do this? Why do you want to go there? Why do you want to speak there? Why do you want to like, what is that about? Like, and checking in with her sometimes too, as to like why. Um, yeah, what are we about?
yeah.
So,
Another question that occurs to me is I'm curious. I know there are probably some textbook dictionary type definitions to these words, and then there's also probably, the social work lens to these words. But um, I guess what I'm really appealing to is your own personal lived experience sense of these words. Like,
yeah,
how would you draw a distinction between sobriety in the sense of abstinence from substances versus recovery and really working a program related to sobriety
yeah.
versus healing, adding on the root causes. So if I yeah, from a lived experience perspective, what would be the distinction between sobriety, recovery, and healing?
When we said something earlier kind of about that in the context like working with other people and I thought about like when I tell people like, well, what's triage worthy, like what do we need to address first before we can get to anything else? And so for me, yes, removing the substances and clearing the fog, it was, and could not have gotten to the next phase without that part, because it just skews it for me. And so really being clean and sober, which then gives you the ability to have emotional sobriety that's not so up and down. I mean, it's still going to be, you're going to have ups and downs, but, and then recovery in the form of like step work, substance use, that mode, um, to start to ask, like, why do you do this? Why is this, identifying that that's an escape? What am I trying to escape from? And then, where those patterns come into play, the obsession and compulsion part of that, the justification part, like looking at that, kind of how you set yourself up to make it, because nothing in use is oftentimes our fault. Everything is everybody else's fault, and or the set of circumstances that set us up to give us the perfect reason to, I just needed to, do that. I needed to not think tonight. Oh, we broke up, perfect reason, let's tie one on, and um but then healing and incorporating other modalities for me, like, because and just for me, I was continuing to utilize other negative coping skills much more frequently prior to any healing, and especially when you think about like trauma work, because I didn't recognize that those responses came from other experiences, and not just the childhood stuff, but adolescent, teenage, young adult, like um, things that happen sometimes. I mean, now that I'm married and working on a healthy relationship, and things come up, and it triggers a response, because this reminds me, this feels like this situation and this, set of circumstances, but not knowing that initially. Not realizing that if in the beginning, when we were figuring out how to deal with one another, and if he raised his voice to me, that it felt like, whether it was childhood or early adult relationships or whatever, and like, so then I went into like retaliation of, in a big response that didn't require anything more than, I'd like to keep our conversation at this level. Utilizing when I feel, and that's across the board, whether it be, and even with my kids, like being able to set boundaries and recovery, right? Like early, that part, I'm just trying to be a good mom. I'm trying to do everything that I can to be a good mom, you know, clean up the wreckage of my past, but that left me without being equipped enough to set boundaries and sometimes even discipline them, which is doing both of us a favor. And so, in the healing part of that, and then addressing that very much as a whole family system, and my daughter using therapy, and us, incorporating tools, because I mean, now dealing with another teenager, because she's 13, of, addressing one another, and utilizing, again, we use when I feel, and when you raise your voice to me, or when I say we need to leave at 3 o'clock and you're not out of your room until 3:05, I feel like my timeline didn't matter, but not coming at each other accusatory, or either from a like, I'm the parent, here's the consequence, because I can, because again, like, you parent how you were parented. Well, I didn't like how I was parented. And so, but without developing some other tools, and that somewhat came from recovery, but really from healing. And then to even hear my mom say sometimes, be the parent you wish you had. you know, and without her saying anything more than that. That does so much. Like that, the first time she ever said that, like I heard her in the context related to the situation and thought, okay, I can do that. It made me think about what didn't you have, Rachel, that you needed, you know? And then I hear my mother without having to say, I'm sorry, but so much validation in, I recognize that you didn't get what you needed. And now you have the choice with this adolescent young man to say and do something different. And those are for sure some full circle moments. And I feel really privileged that I do get to experience that with my family because for so many people that's not their truth.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story with us, Rachel. I feel really inspired and, also just really, really grateful for you sharing this real full circle story to go from um, that young childhood authenticity and then wound to finding authenticity again later and being the parent you wish you had and the recovery that you are involved in yourself and how you also help others with that. There's just so much paying it forward, so much full circle kind of moments in your story.
Thank you.
Mm. And as we're wrapping up the episode today, I'm curious what sort of takeaway do you hope that our listeners are getting out of this story, or what takeaway are you taking out of it freshly today as you've told us your story?
Well, again, just the journey. One of the things that knowing the ladies that work with your program specifically has been a gift. When I first opened our recovery home, it was very limited to 12 steps is the this way. And so because of programs like yours, I get to now say, no, this is just a piece of the puzzle, girls. Like we are going to go over here and we're going to learn this and we're going to expand. And I don't know where your recovery journey might take you. But because the options now are so expansive and it's so neat. It's so neat to get to be a part of that, in other workplaces and be affiliated with people and watch other colleagues and it just, yeah. So I would say don't limit yourself. And if it's not working, ask around, find something else, find the group, show up at the things, do the stuff, like go to the drum circle, get in the yoga, do the because just because it worked for Sally or Sue doesn't mean that it's going to work for Samantha. Like Samantha might need something else, and she's going to come across the right people if she's searching and curious enough that are going to lead that journey forward.
Such a great point. It is such an individualized and personalized process.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too.